This is the remains of a device detonated on a packed tube train at 8:20 this morning. The fifth terrorist attack in the UK this year targeted the morning commute, the school run.
Right, guys, let's get away and let's move right down the end of the platform.
29 people were treated in hospital. There were no serious injuries. Two teachers, one stopped from work, were near the device as it went off at the back of the train. Described a fireball coming at them down the carriage.
I saw the fire emerge towards my side. So I heard a lady screaming.
I was falling over people myself, and I was just saying to myself, keep up, right? Because either you're going to be crumpled to death or you've got a madman behind you, because I still didn't know what was going on.
People described to us a flash of fire suddenly running up the walls of the carriage, burning those nearby. Then the panic. People like this young photographer.
Clothes just burnt completely away.
Are you okay? How are you feeling?
I'm very, very shocked, and I'm, it's just that moment when people are running towards me and pushing you out the way, and you're unsure of what's happening. You don't know whether to fight or run, and it was that sort of 10 seconds of sheer panic. And the whole train went through it, and it was just like a tidal wave.
But now what's happening is that I think people are getting crushed on the stairwell.
After the initial surge of people, this was the scene on the crowded platform. People trying to make sense of what had happened.
I just saw the fire and my entire thing, everybody panicked.
And in the crowd, flashes of panic, moments of comfort.
It wasn't a loud bang, and there was a kind of it sounded like something cracked.
Rory Rigney was close to the bomb and gave us a detailed account of what happened and of the device itself.
Well, when I saw the fireball, that was when I knew, and I just jumped out the door. The doors were still open.
After the initial explosion, Rory explains that the air filled up with a chemical smell.
It was kind of plasticky, but there was also this kind of foamy smell. Like, that's why I thought, oh, was it a fire hydrant that went off? And then obviously I went, and stupidly a few of us went in, because I went in to grab my bag that I dropped.
On returning to the carriage, he photographed the device. The device itself was primitive and, thankfully, defective. What appears to be a white paint pot concealed inside a simple carrier bag. The potentially lethal package went unnoticed inside the busy train until it was too late.
I took a photo, and it started making more noise, so I was like, I'll get out of there. I thought, just to give to the police, because one of the photos looked a bit strange. It had some red wires, so I thought I'd better give them that.
Still partly on fire when these pictures were taken, wires are clearly visible sticking out from the would-be bomb. It's still not known exactly why it failed to fully detonate. It's been reported that some sort of timer device may have been attached to the IED. The official police statement today didn't speak to this point, but emphasised that the search is on for a perpetrator.
We now assess that this was a detonation of an improvised explosive device. The investigation is being led by the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Command and part of the National Counter-Terrorism Policing Network. And there are many urgent inquiries ongoing now, with hundreds of detectives involved, looking at CCTV, forensic work and speaking to witnesses.
The Mayor of London today.
There is a manhunt underway as we speak.
Does that mean that the police have a key suspect in mind?
Well, I'm simply not allowed. It won't be sensible for me to discuss what the police have and what they don't have.
After a Cobra meeting today, the Prime Minister reiterated that the terrorism threat level will remain at severe as opposed to imminent, but will stay under review.
The public should go about their daily lives, but remain vigilant, and people who are travelling in London will see an increased armed police presence on the transport network, and they will see security will be increased, and the police will, of course, do what is necessary to protect the public.
Rory Rigney, like the city he lives in, prides himself with just getting on with it, but speaks for many, no doubt, when he says this.
But to be actually there, and to think how much worse it could have been, I think that's the thing that's going to probably kick home in a little bit. But if they say that it didn't go off properly, I mean, that's just, I'm not a religious person, but that is kind of very lucky.
Well, with the latest on the police investigation, Paul McNamara is outside Scotland Yard now. Paul, can you tell us any more?
Well, to be honest with you, Kathy, not an awful lot of information has been coming out of that building during the day. So at this moment, 11 hours after this attack, the person or people behind this incident are still on the loose, and a massive manhunt is underway. And now many people at home were wondering just how is that possible in this day and age in London, one of the most watched cities in the world. Well, we've been told that hundreds of detectives and MI5 officers are now involved in this investigation, and their first port of call will be CCTV footage. Now, for those people at home not familiar with the District Tube line, Parsons Green is the 6th station of the line that starts at Wimbledon and goes right through the heart of the city. So that's 5 stations worth there of CCTV to check whether or not someone boarded the train with this device. And then there's also the train itself. This is a relatively new train with cameras the whole way through it.
Well, what more do we know about the device, Paul?
Well, there are some reports at the moment saying that there was possibly there was a timer on the device. So the person or people behind this attack may not have been on the train when this actually went off. But importantly, there is a device to investigate. Investigators were on the scene within an hour, and they were taking swabs looking for DNA and fingerprint samples. And they were also looking at the design of the bomb. Is this something that they're familiar with, something they've come across before? They might join some dots as to who might be behind it. Now, we've been talking to some experts from the bomb disposal world today, and they've told us that from looking at the pictures they've seen of it, what we're dealing with here is a relatively crude design. Essentially, a bucket filled with explosives, and the wires coming out of it that are attached to fairy lights or Christmas lights, that's a well-known crude detonator. And they say what they think may well have happened here is that the detonator's gone off, but not the main charge. And if that did go off, we would be dealing with an atrocity on a completely different level. Now, one thing that we do know is that Theresa May has said the terror threat level will remain at severe. That's the second highest level, and that means that a terror attack is highly likely. But despite the fact that the person or people behind this are still at large, it hasn't been raised to critical, which means that a threat is expected imminently. Now, that may well change. You remember after the Manchester bomb a couple of months ago, it took 24 hours before the terror threat level was risen to its highest limit. So at the moment, this is an evolving investigation, and as soon as we have any more information, we'll come back to you.
Paul, thank you very much. Well, I'm joined now by Richard Aylmer Hall, who you just saw in Porrick O'Brien's report there. Richard, you were on the tube this morning. Tell us when you first knew that something was wrong.
I was totally unaware at first. I was just reading my paper and listening to some music, and then all of a sudden that entire carriage just bundled out. Everybody who was on the platform waiting to get on the train at the station where the train had just stopped was just charging up to the end of the platform where the exit is. It was just like a complete stampede. So that was the first I knew there was anything wrong had happened.
It must have been pretty frightening with all the people sort of surging towards the exit.
It was quite frightening to watch. I felt safe myself because I was sitting down on the carriage, but straight away you start to wonder what's gone on, why is everybody running, what are they running from? You know, is there somebody waving a machete around or something like that? And I couldn't see anybody being threatening. Then I overheard somebody saying that she'd seen what had happened, she'd seen the package start to smoke and flames coming out of it. And so, you know, from that point on, we knew it was something like a minor terrorist attack.
What went through your mind at that point when you thought you were caught up in this horrific incident?
Initially quite worried that there might be somebody who was, you know, going to shoot or wave a knife around. And then after that, it was just a question of, you know, am I safe? How do I get out of here safely? And once I realised there was no immediate threat, you know, I was able to, you know, shoot a bit of video, take some pictures, and then call family and friends.
And what did you sort of, was your heart racing? I mean, were you sort of sweaty palms, or did you feel pretty calm at that point?
I'm a pretty calm person, so, you know, I was trying to be calm and collected. Then as soon as I started trying to use my phone, my fingers were shaking. I couldn't hit the buttons correctly, so I realised I was a bit shocked by what had happened.
I mean, obviously, Londoners, get used to these kind of threats in a horrific kind of way. Had you ever thought that you yourself would be caught up in one? How do you deal with that?
No, it comes as a complete surprise. In fact, it's the second one I've been at. I was at London Bridge in '92 when the IRA blew a bomb there. And it just comes as a complete surprise. You never think you're going to get caught up in something like that.
And the Prime Minister says, we should all go about our normal lives. Do you feel you can do that? Do you feel fearful? Do you feel angry?
No, she's quite right. People in London have got to get used to the fact that this is, London's a big target. If you want to be in London, if you want to work and live around London, it's just a fact of life.
Richard, thank you very much for joining us. Good luck.
Pleasure.
Well, more armed police have been deployed across London's transport network as the Prime Minister said the UK's threat level would stay at the second highest level of severe. Mrs May also had some strong words for the US President Donald Trump after he tweeted that the people behind the attack had been in Scotland Yard's sights. It was not helpful to speculate, she said. But how well is the government tackling the terror threat? Here's our political correspondent, Michael Crick.
March, Westminster Bridge. 6 dead, 49 injured. May, the Manchester Arena, 22 killed, 250 injured. June, London Bridge, 8 dead, 48 injured. Later in June, Finsbury Park, 1 dead, 10 injured. 5 attacks in less than 6 months, one of the most intense periods of terrorist activity on the British mainland, with politicians seemingly powerless to stop it, beyond determined, formulaic and comforting words. This was Theresa May after London Bridge.
Enough is enough. Everybody needs to go about their lives as they normally would.
And today, once again, ministers and security chiefs met for another so-called Cobra meeting, named after Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. Afterwards, Theresa May had to speak again.
We're looking very carefully at the powers that our police and security services have to make sure they have the powers they need. But it's also why we're working with the internet companies. The Home Secretary has visited Silicon Valley, spoken with the internet companies, and next week at UNGA I'll be chairing a session, co-hosting it with President Macron from France to talk about what more we can be doing to ensure that we deal with the terrorist propaganda, with the extremist propaganda, with the hatred that is put out across the internet.
Earlier, Donald Trump tweeted, "Another attack in London by a loser terrorist. These are sick and demented people who are in the sights of Scotland Yard. Must be proactive."
We have to be very smart. We have to be very, very tough, which perhaps we're not nearly tough enough. But that is just an absolutely terrible thing. In fact, I'm going to call the Prime Minister right now.
Have you been briefed on any intelligence about the attack?
Yes, I have. On numerous things happening, including North Korea.
In saying this was by people who were in the sights of Scotland Yard, had the President leaked intelligence from Britain, as he did in May when Theresa May admonished him?
I will be making clear to President Trump today that intelligence that is shared between law enforcement agencies must remain secure.
And another ticking off today.
I never think it's helpful for anybody to speculate on what is an ongoing investigation.
But it doesn't seem Donald Trump said what he did on the basis of intelligence from London. Meanwhile, Sadiq Khan warned that austerity was making it harder to beat terrorism.
Since 2010, we've lost hundreds of millions of pounds from our policing budget. It's simply not sustainable for us to carry on policing London safely with those levels of cuts.
Theresa May says she's protected police and counter-terrorism budgets. In the 12 months to June, a record 379 people were arrested on suspicion of terrorism-linked offences.
Michael Crick reporting there. Well, I'm joined now by the Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott, the Conservative spokesman for transport on the London Assembly, Keith Prince, and Julia Ebner, who's an extremism expert at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Diane Abbott first. Theresa May said after the London Bridge attack, enough is enough. What should the response to this latest attack be?
I think we need to be careful not to speculate about what needs to happen. We don't know who has done this. We don't know why they've done it. What I would say, as someone who commutes on public transport every day, that there must be millions of Londoners who commute into work in the morning, and also children going to school, who are very frightened by what's happened.
I mean, the Mayor of London has come out today and said that the police simply can't keep people safe if the government carries on cutting budgets. Is that your view too?
Well, my view is that resources are an issue. And
so are people safe as resources stand?
You cannot keep people safe on the cheap. And the Mayor is having to make 400 million worth of cuts to the Metropolitan Police. And
so people aren't as safe as they were?
You cannot keep people safe on the cheap.
Keith Prince, that's quite a charge, isn't it, that your party has cut resources to the extent that people are now not as safe as they were?
Well, I know that's been said. I think it's a great shame, actually. Today we should be thinking about the people who've been injured, we should be thinking about their families, and we should be praising the emergency service, those brave women and men who, when everybody's quite understandably running away from danger, they're running towards it and putting their lives on the line.
That is all undeniably true, but it is also true that since 2010, the Conservative-led government has cut almost 20,000 police, 18,991 police.
You're talking about national figures, not London figures. In London,
well, across the country.
London Boris kept the number of police at 32,000, and it's only since Mr Khan has been mayor that figure has been cut, and that he took £38 million out of the budget to cut the police down to 31,000.
So this is the London Mayor's fault?
I don't want to get into party politics when so many people have been so frightened today. It must be right that London needs proper resources to deal with the terrorism threat, which is a particular issue in our capital city.
Julia Ebner, I mean, it was the incompetence of whoever planted this bomb that ultimately stopped people dying. Are our authorities across the terrorist threat?
I think it's really hard to say at this point because we don't yet know anything about either the motive or whether it was a failure on the side of the intelligence or the security forces, or whether it could have been prevented. I think there's not enough yet to go into speculations on this. And I agree with you, Diane. I think it's really the most harmful thing that can be done right now is to start speculating. And because what we see from our research is we see spikes in the mobilization activities of all sides, on all sides of extremists.
But what more needs to be done by the police, by governments, to keep people safe, in your view?
I think more needs to go into really the prevention of extremism and into the prevention of radicalization, and that means tackling all forms of extremism in a more through breaking apart narratives that would be shaped in the immediate aftermath of such attacks. For example, now what we see happening on the Telegram channels, but also on far-right channels, is that this feeds into the broader narrative that there is an inevitable war of races, cultures or religions, and I think that is something we need to tackle.
Diana, but do you agree that ultimately this isn't about money, it's about tackling the ideology, and a lot of that is on the internet, the hatred on the internet? That's what Theresa May talked about today.
We need to be careful. We don't know what sort of terrorism this is, we don't know who it is. It might be Islamic terrorism, but it might be another type of terrorism. In the end, you cannot keep the British people safe on the cheap. That's all I would say. I wouldn't like to say more because we don't know enough to say.
I mean, that is the case, isn't it? That you can't do this on the cheap, but do you also need to tackle the internet hatred as Theresa May was talking about?
I think you're right. I think that we have to nip it in the bud. It's no good clearing up after the event, and whatever we can do in the way of prevent. But do remember that the counter-terrorism budget has been frozen, that hasn't been cut in any way at all, and indeed Cressida Dick said after the London bridge bombings that she felt that London was well resourced when it came to counter-terrorism. But absolutely we need to spend time and resources on prevention. And if we can look into the internet and find people before they actually commit these atrocities, well, that's clearly the best way forward.
But Cressida Dick also has spoken publicly about resources being extremely stretched. That is of concern to Londoners, is of concern to people across the country, isn't it?
Of course, but we all have to cut our suit to fit the cloth.
Oh no. There's no more important role for government than keeping people safe. And I accept what you say about the counter-terrorism figures, but actually it's ordinary community policemen who are often the front line in terms of relating to communities and getting information. And this is a concern, that there isn't the resources.
That's the point, isn't it? Neighbourhood policing, you need the intelligence from that to tackle some of these plots that are being unveiled.
Yes, you do, but again, we don't need a situation where we have 2 policemen tied down in every ward in London when in the past we've managed with 1 and the rest have been able to be used as a special force to do other projects. But now they're all tied down into the boroughs, into the wards, and not able to do the responses and so on.
We don't know who planted this bomb, but there's all sorts of speculation. How worried are you that there will be a backlash and community tensions rising?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest problem, because we see this climate of fear mounting in London, in the UK in general, after having had so many attacks this year. The divisions within communities are really getting worse and worse, and I think that is something that, of course, is the ultimate goal of terrorists, and that is something we should really resist. And so I think it's really important to shape the narrative in the aftermath and to mobilize the moderates in the middle, everyone who is against driving further apart our communities.
Diana,
we don't want a backlash, but Londoners are more sensible and more robust than
but
you
are
might
they?
think.
I mean, people are fearful, aren't they?
After 7/7, though, everyone said there'd be a backlash after 7/7, and the political leadership from the then Mayor Ken Livingstone, and there was no backlash. And I think Londoners, we live side by side, we're one community, and I think it's very concerning and it's very alarming for people, but I'm not so worried about a backlash in the way you describe.
5th terrorist attack in 6 months, though. Do you think people are starting to get more fearful now when this begins to seem horrifically routine?
Well, I think you would have to have concerns, wouldn't you? But I don't think we need to blow this out of proportion insofar as people living in London. I come from a borough called Redbridge, which is down Ilford Way, and it's got a majority BME population. And we live side by side because we go to school together, we play together, we work together, and all the different communities get on really, really well. And this is where we must not let the individuals, certain people, actually trying to. That's what they're trying to achieve. It's the odd one or two who want to turn us against each other, and we have to be bigger than that and stick together.
On that note of agreement, Julia Ebner, Keith Prince, Diane Abbott, thank you all very much for joining us.